The Galactic Council had convened in the Grand Chamber of Ardentas Prime, a planet considered neutral ground for all species. For centuries, the Council had been the cornerstone of peace among the known civilizations, a place where treaties were made, disputes were settled, and fragile alliances were held together. But this time, things were different. Humans had arrived on the galactic stage relatively late compared to the ancient species that had ruled the stars for millennia. Yet, in a matter of decades, they had established themselves as one of the most formidable and unpredictable forces in the galaxy. Their rise had been a mixture of diplomacy, trade, and, when necessary, war. Unlike other species that relied on rigid hierarchies and long, drawn-out decision-making processes, humans adapted quickly, thought independently, and acted decisively. This made them both respected and feared. For years, the Council had tried to bring humanity fully into their fold, offering them a seat among the most influential species. But humans had their own way of doing things, and they never fully embraced the bureaucratic structure that slowed down progress in favor of endless debate. Still, they attended meetings, listened to proposals, and engaged in discussions until now. The council chamber was filled with representatives from all corners of the galaxy. Some were towering insectoids with glistening carapaces, others were scaled creatures with slit pupil eyes, and a few were amorphous beings whose forms constantly shifted. They all waited, tension thick in the air, as the human delegation stood up from their seats. Without a word, they walked out of the chamber. The doors closed behind them with a finality that sent a ripple of unease through the gathered species. For a moment, there was silence. Then panic erupted. The humans were leaving, not just this meeting, but the entire council. There had been no formal declaration, no warning, just a quiet, deliberate departure that spoke volumes. The council had failed to secure humanity's cooperation, and now they would have to deal with the consequences. The ripple effects were immediate. Trade agreements that depended on human resources and technology were suddenly in jeopardy. Defense pacts, already fragile, became meaningless. Many species had grown reliant on human ingenuity, and without them, everything became uncertain. Behind closed doors, governments scrambled to determine what this meant for their own interests. Some feared war. Humanity had proven itself more than capable in battle, and now that they had severed ties, no one knew what their next move would be. Others worried about economic collapse. Human-run corporations held significant influence in several star systems, and if they withdrew their investments, entire planetary economies could be ruined overnight. Whispers spread quickly across the stars. Was this a sign of hostility? Had humans decided that the council was beyond repair? Or had they simply grown tired of the endless bureaucracy and chosen to forge their own path? The lack of answers only deepened the fear. Even those who had once dismissed humans as a short-lived, reckless species began to reconsider. There had always been an unspoken belief among the elder races that humanity was young, that they would eventually fall in line like every other species before them. But now, with their sudden departure, it became clear that humans were different. They would not be controlled. They would not be bound by traditions that no longer served them. For the first time in centuries, the council faced an uncertain future. Without humanity, the delicate balance of power had been shattered. New alliances would have to be formed, new strategies developed. But deep down, every leader knew the truth. Without humans, the galaxy was weaker, and whether they liked it or not, they would have to find a way to bring them back. Meanwhile, humanity did not look back. They had wasted enough time in endless debates, in discussions that led nowhere. While the rest of the galaxy panicked, they moved forward. Their fleets expanded, their colonies thrived, and their influence continued to grow. They were no longer just another member of the council. They were something more. They were independent, unstoppable, and, most importantly, unbound by anyone else's rules. The council had underestimated humanity. That mistake would haunt them for generations to come. And to turn on each other. Accusations flew. Had someone insulted the humans? Had they been betrayed? Had another faction secretly negotiated against them? Every possible explanation was considered, but none brought any comfort. The humans had left, and they were not coming back. News of their departure spread across the galaxy within hours. Human colonies stopped responding to diplomatic messages. Their trade fleets ceased operations in Council-controlled space. Military vessels that had once patrolled the borders alongside their allies withdrew to their own territories. The humans weren't attacking anyone, but their absence alone was enough to send a wave of uncertainty through the stars. Worlds that had relied on human innovations found themselves struggling. Their technologies had become deeply integrated into countless civilizations, and without human specialists to maintain them, entire sectors faced the risk of collapse. Trade routes that had once been safe under the protection of human patrols were suddenly vulnerable to piracy and rogue factions. Economic markets plummeted as investors panicked over what this would mean for the future. The Council tried to downplay the crisis. Statements were issued reassuring the galaxy that negotiations would continue and that agreements would still be made. But behind closed doors, the reality was clear. The Council had grown dependent on humanity, and they had never realized how much until now. Some factions attempted to reach out, sending emissaries to the human territories. None returned with a response. The humans were not ignoring them. They had simply chosen to move on. They were focused inward, strengthening their own worlds, expanding their own industries, and securing their own future. They no longer needed the Council. Perhaps they never had. As weeks turned into months, the consequences became undeniable. The Council had grown weaker, its authority questioned by species that once followed its every decision. Minor conflicts began to flare up. Disputes that once would have been settled through diplomacy now leading to skirmishes and standoffs. Without human presence to keep the peace, old rivalries resurfaced. Some members of the Council began whispering about reconciliation, about making an offer that would bring the humans back. Others, too proud or too bitter, insisted they could move forward without them. But deep down, everyone knew the truth. The humans had not abandoned negotiations. They had abandoned the Council itself. The galaxy had taken them for granted, assumed they would always be there, always willing to negotiate, always ready to be part of something greater. But the humans had never needed the Council. The Council had needed them, and now, they were gone. The Galactic Council, once the most powerful governing body in the known universe, was crumbling, not because of war, not because of an external threat, but because they had underestimated humanity, and there was nothing they could do to bring them back. The Galactic Council had always believed that humanity would be an easy species to control. They were young compared to the other civilizations, newcomers to the interstellar stage, still learning the deeper complexities of diplomacy and politics. The Council had seen this before, species eager to prove themselves, desperate for a seat at the table, willing to make concessions to secure their place. But humanity had proven different. From the beginning, their approach had been calculated and deliberate. They sent their best minds, their most experienced negotiators, and yet, at every turn, they refused to bend to the will of the Council. The other species, some of them thousands of years older, had grown frustrated. The humans were not giving in, not compromising in the way the Council had expected. Instead, they demanded fair treatment, equal standing, and respect. They refused to accept the hierarchy that had long been established, where older civilizations dictated terms to younger ones. For months, the negotiations dragged on. The humans listened carefully, made their points with logic and precision, but when the Council pushed for terms that would limit their expansion, stripped them of independent military strength, and force them into economic subjugation. They stood firm. The council's members, composed of dozens of alien species, grew impatient. The breaking point came when the council attempted to enforce an agreement without full human approval. A final document was drafted, with clauses designed to keep humanity in check, preventing them from becoming a major power. The humans were expected to sign it without issue. That was how it always went. Every new species eventually relented. They chose submission over conflict, but humanity did not. Without a word, without any dramatic display, the human delegation stood up and left the chamber. No threats, no warnings, just a silent, deliberate withdrawal. The council members sat in stunned silence as the humans walked out, refusing to acknowledge the treaty, refusing to be bound by the restrictions placed upon them. Panic rippled through the chamber. The council had assumed they had control, that humanity would never simply walk away. But now, without their agreement, the treaty was meaningless. The humans would act independently. They would expand, build, and defend themselves without oversight. There would be no limits placed on their military, no restrictions on their technology, no economic chains to bind them. The council convened emergency meetings, desperate to find a solution. Some called for immediate sanctions, but humanity had made themselves invaluable to interstellar trade. Others suggested military intervention, but humanity's technological growth had outpaced expectations, and no one wanted to risk direct conflict. Some tried to reach out to individual human leaders, hoping to salvage an agreement, but there was no response. The humans had made their position clear. Across the galaxy, word spread. The humans had defied the council, something no species had ever done without consequence. And yet, no immediate retaliation came. Other civilizations, especially those who had suffered under the council's control, took notice. Some began questioning their own place in the hierarchy, wondering if they too could break free. Dissent grew. The council's authority weakened. Meanwhile, humanity moved forward. Their fleets expanded, their colonies grew stronger, and their technology advanced without restriction. They continued trade, maintained diplomatic ties with friendly species, but they no longer sought approval. They no longer played by the council's rules. Years passed, and the balance of power shifted. The council remained, but it was no longer an unquestioned authority. The humans had proven that independence was possible, that no species was obligated to submit. One by one, other civilizations followed, breaking away, forming their own alliances, their own futures. And through it all, humanity thrived, not because they had superior numbers or ancient wisdom, but because they had refused to be controlled. They had chosen freedom over convenience, strength over submission, and in doing so, they changed the course of galactic history forever. The Galactic Council chamber was a vast, circular room, its walls lined with shimmering panels that displayed the symbols of hundreds of species. The air was thick with tension, the kind that comes from too many voices trying to speak at once, too many egos clashing in a space meant for unity. Representatives from across the galaxy had gathered, their ships docked in the orbiting stations above the council planet. The topic of discussion was one that had been debated for years: the integration of humanity into the Galactic Council. Humans had been a curiosity to the galaxy for decades. When their first faster-than-light ship had been detected, many species had dismissed them as just another primitive race, destined to either destroy themselves or fade into obscurity. But humanity had surprised everyone. They had expanded rapidly, colonizing planets, building alliances, and demonstrating a knack for survival that bordered on the miraculous. Their technology was crude by galactic standards, but their ingenuity was unmatched. They had a way of finding solutions where others saw only problems. For years, the Galactic Council had debated whether to allow humanity a seat at the table. Some species argued that humans were too unpredictable, too prone to conflict. Others saw potential in their resilience and creativity. The negotiations had dragged on, with humans patiently presenting their case, offering trade deals, sharing technology, and proving their worth. But patience, as it turned out, had its limits. The breaking point came during the final round of negotiations. The Council had proposed a series of conditions for humanity's inclusion: strict limits on their expansion, mandatory oversight of their military, and a requirement that they adopt certain galactic laws. The terms were harsh, designed to keep humanity in check, to ensure they could never become a threat. The human delegation had listened quietly, their faces unreadable. When the Council finished speaking, the humans stood, gathered their things, and left without a word. The Council chamber erupted into chaos. Species that had never agreed on anything found themselves united in confusion and anger. How could the humans simply walk away? Did they not understand the honor of being invited to join the Galactic Council? Did they not care about the consequences of their actions? The answer came swiftly. Within days, reports began to flood in from across the galaxy. Human colonies that had once been open to trade were now closed off, their borders sealed. Human ships, once a common sight in galactic ports, had vanished. The few humans who remained in Council space were tight-lipped, offering no explanation for their species' sudden withdrawal. As the weeks turned into months, the true impact of humanity's decision became clear. The Galactic Council had always relied on the cooperation of its member species. Trade routes, defense pacts, scientific research, all of it required a delicate balance of give and take. But without humanity, that balance began to crumble. Humanity had been a key player in many of the Council's most important projects. Their ships had transported goods across the galaxy. Their engineers had helped build the infrastructure that connected countless worlds. And their scientists had contributed to breakthroughs in medicine, energy, and communication. Without them, the Council found itself struggling to maintain the systems it had taken for granted. Worse still, humanity's absence created a power vacuum. Species that had once been content to follow the Council's lead began to question its authority. Old rivalries resurfaced, and new alliances formed in secret. The Council, once a symbol of unity, was now a fractured body, its members more concerned with their own interests than the greater good. In the midst of this chaos, humanity remained silent. Their colonies thrived, their technology advanced, but they made no attempt to rejoin the galactic community. It was as if they had turned their backs on the galaxy, content to forge their own path. For the Galactic Council, the lesson was clear. They had underestimated humanity, assuming that their eagerness to join the Council meant they were willing to accept any terms. But humanity had proven that they were not like the other species. They did not need the Council to survive, to thrive. They had their own way of doing things, and they were not afraid to walk away from a deal that did not serve their interests. In the end, it was the Council that suffered the most. Without humanity, they were weaker, less capable, less united. They had lost not just a potential ally, but a reminder of what they could achieve when they worked together. And as the galaxy descended into chaos, humanity watched from afar, a silent witness to the consequences of their decision. The story of humanity's abandonment of the Galactic Council became a cautionary tale, a reminder that power and influence are not given, but earned. And while the Council struggled to pick up the pieces, humanity continued to move forward, their eyes fixed on the stars, their future unwritten. The Galactic Council chamber was a vast, circular room, its walls lined with shimmering panels that displayed the symbols of countless star systems. The air was thick with tension, a palpable weight that pressed down on the delegates from 100 different species. At the center of the room, a holographic map of the galaxy rotated slowly, its intricate web of trade routes and alliances glowing faintly in the dim light. The Council had been in session for days, debating the terms of a new treaty that would bind the galaxy's civilizations together in a fragile peace. But now, the humans had walked out. The humans had always been different. When they first joined the Galactic Council, they were seen as a curiosity, a young, brash species that had barely mastered interstellar travel. But over the decades, they had proven themselves to be resourceful, adaptable, and, above all, unpredictable. Their ships were fast, their weapons were advanced, and their diplomats were shrewd. They had earned a seat at the table, but they had never fully embraced the Council's way of doing things. And now, they had abandoned the negotiations altogether. The council chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates shouted over each other, their voices rising in a cacophony of anger and confusion. The Krell, a reptilian species known for their short tempers, slammed their scaled fists on the table, demanding an explanation. The ZYN, a race of insectoid diplomats, clicked their mandibles in agitation, their antennae twitching as they tried to make sense of the situation. Even the serene Alorians, who rarely showed emotion, exchanged worried glances, their luminous eyes flickering with unease. The humans had left no explanation, no warning. One moment, their delegation had been seated at the table, their faces unreadable as they listened to the debates. The next, they had stood up, gathered their things, and walked out without a word. The council's attempts to contact them had been met with silence. Their ships, which had been orbiting the council's homeworld, had vanished without a trace. The implications were staggering. The treaty was meant to prevent a war that had been brewing for years, a conflict that could tear the galaxy apart. The humans had been a key part of the negotiations, their influence crucial in bridging the gap between the warring factions. Without them, the delicate balance of power was shattered. The council was left scrambling to pick up the pieces, but it was clear that no one could fill the void the humans had left behind. As the days passed, the situation grew more dire. Rumors began to spread, whispers of human fleets massing on the edges of known space, of secret alliances and hidden agendas. The council's intelligence networks were flooded with reports, but none of them could be verified. The humans had always been good at keeping secrets, and now it seemed they had disappeared entirely. Then, just as the council was on the verge of collapse, the humans returned. Their ships reappeared in orbit, their sleek, angular hulls gleaming in the light of the system's star. But they did not come alone. Behind them, trailing in their wake, was a fleet unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It was a patchwork of ships from a dozen different species, their hulls scarred and battered, their engines glowing with the faint light of long journeys. At the center of the fleet was a massive vessel, its design unmistakably human. The council watched in stunned silence as the human delegation returned to the chamber. They walked with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, their faces calm and composed. They took their seats at the table, and for a moment, the room was silent. Then, the leader of the human delegation stood up and addressed the council. They spoke of unity, of strength in diversity. They spoke of a galaxy where no species would be left behind, where the weak would be protected and the strong would be held accountable. They spoke of a new treaty, one that would not be dictated by the old powers, but forged by the collective will of all civilizations. And they spoke of the fleet they had brought with them, a coalition of species that had been marginalized and ignored by the council, but who had found common cause with the humans. The council was stunned. The humans had not abandoned the negotiations. They had gone out into the galaxy and built a new alliance, one that could not be ignored. The old powers, the ones who had dominated the council for centuries, were suddenly faced with a choice: adapt or be left behind. In the end, the treaty was signed. It was not the treaty the council had envisioned, but it was stronger, more inclusive, and more resilient. The humans had not just changed the terms of the agreement, they had changed the very nature of the galaxy. And as the delegates left the chamber, the holographic map of the galaxy still rotating slowly above them, it was clear that nothing would ever be the same again. The humans had not just thrown the Galactic Council into chaos, they had reshaped it. And in doing so, they had ensured that the galaxy would never again be ruled by the few, but by the many. It was a new dawn, and the humans had been the ones to bring it.